for years.
You're referring not to the current, but to Desert Storm.
Desert Storm, yes.
Okay, Colonel Macgregor.
Well, I'm a little confused. He was talking about what the Turks did.
Yes, they delayed the Fourth Army at the last minute.
You mean the Fourth Infantry Division? That was in 2003.
Fourth Infantry, yes.
Well, first of all, the Turks were badly hurt in 1991 economically by our actions. They were very unhappy with what we did and how the war turned out. They would have preferred that we went ahead and executed the mission, as I've outlined in the book, and disposed of Saddam Hussein. So the first thing is that the Turks suffered economically, and they would argue also in security terms horrendously as a result of our intervention, because the other thing we did is effectively unleash the PPK. These are the so-called Kurdish freedom fighters that over the last 15 to 20 years have killed 50,000 Turkish citizens. So the Turks aren't very happy with us to begin with. So in 2003, when we talked about going through that country, they weren't very receptive, and they had reasons to feel that way. And the other thing is, remember that inside Turkey itself, and this is, again, something Americans are not aware of, there has been a rather dramatic revival of Islamism. That is, the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood in Turkey and their fellow travelers are enormously powerful and influential now in ways that they were not 20 years ago. So I think that Turkey is, in most cases, a NATO ally, almost in name only, and has moved decisively into the Islamist camp. So that's part of the issue. And finally, I would tell you that moving that force over the mountains in Turkey was, to be blunt, a rather dumb idea and unnecessary.
Ah, okay. All right, you cleared that up for me, sir. Thank you, and I salute you for your service, sir. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Wow, you have an amazing ability to take a caller who's just short of hostile and completely turn him around with a 90-second answer. That's amazing. Is this part of what you mean in the book when you talk about how the Operation Desert Storm was sanitized for the public?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, without question. I mean, one of the things that we thought was very strange was this Colin Powell's assertion that this highway of death would alienate the world against us, because the highway of death, was multiply it by 10, and you had the battlefield in front of us on the 26th of February. It was infinitely more ferocious, and there was a lot more out there. I think that was an excuse, once again, given to the president at the time by General Powell, who was traumatized by his Vietnam experience, was fearful of this continuing, wanted to end it as soon as possible in the hopes that, we weren't going to lose something. Again, it's back to this issue of more afraid of losing a battle than they were worried about winning one.
Is that why you say we lacked a coherent plan in Operation Iraqi Freedom?
Yeah, I think there are two things. Most Americans aren't aware of it, but again, what we planned to do before we went and what we ultimately did were not the same. There was an understanding in 2002 when I went down to Tampa to CENTCOM headquarters, even with General Tommy Franks, that what you didn't want to do was ultimately what we did. You wanted to go into the country, you wanted to get the top people. You didn't want to dismantle the Army. On the contrary, you wanted to pick up the Army and bring it with you. In other words, the Iraqi Army. You wanted to work with them because they were, the last bastion of national order and security. You didn't want to fire all of the bureaucrats in the administration because they were the people with the education and the understanding of how to get things done. What you really wanted to do was essentially replace the top leadership, turn it over to the military, encourage them to invite the UN in 6 months or a year or whatever to supervise elections or something. But you did not want to put Christian American soldiers and Marines, sailors, and airmen in a position of having to administer or govern Muslims. We knew that if you did that, it would be a disaster. It would blow up on our faces. No Muslim will accept government from anyone who is a non-Muslim, period.
Going backwards in time a little bit to Desert Storm, would you explain what happened to the first first contact when the first of your units, the lead force of your units, drew first blood, killed 2 Iraqis, and then took a bunch of prisoners? What did the prisoners tell? What did the POW tell your people about finishing the job in 1991?
Well, that's important. We did something that nobody else in the Army did. We adopted effectively German tactics, and I had a platoon, Bradley platoon, with a mortar section that was 10 to 15 kilometers ahead of us. At some point, they were as far away as 20 or 12 miles. And they essentially took most of a brigade prisoner. They conquered with that platoon, with mortars, with some assistance from airstrikes. They overwhelmed a brigade. And what they found is that most of these people had been pressed into service against their will. Their families had been threatened at gunpoint. And then once they were in our custody, they said, why don't you go forward and ultimately finish the job? Get rid of this man, Saddam Hussein. He's a disaster for us, a disaster for you. We'll all be better without him. And ultimately, when we captured Republican guards on the 26th of February, they said the same thing, and they volunteered to go with us. So that tells you something about the nature of the place.
When your enemy volunteers to help you go after the bigger enemy, there's got to be a message there. Are we tone deaf? Did we totally miss that? I mean,
oh yeah, absolutely. But remember, I never saw anybody senior to me. In other words, there were no generals coming forward to find out what was happening. There were no generals that said, well, why are we stopping? We should continue. The opposite was the case. They kept looking for reasons to hold everyone, looking for reasons to avoid contact with the enemy, and they never came forward to see what was really happening on the ground. And if any of them had come forward, things might have been different.
Should generals be in the field leading with their troops?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, that's the lesson of history. And that, of course, as you know, is why we continue to exalt George Patton, because he was
exactly
so unique in the U.S. military during the Second War.
That's exactly what I was thinking of. That's the picture I had in my head. From the movie, you see Patton taking out an Italian 380 and shooting at a fighter going overhead. That's
well,
the
remember
image
that he was the one who went forward, and as a result, he expected the German attack in the winter of 1944-45.
The Bulge.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But talking about using German tactics, I don't know, Colonel Macgregor. One might accuse you of Rommel envy.
No, I don't think so. But that's you can say that. We simply adopted what we thought made sense. I mean, It's a collective issue. But having gone to school in Germany, lived there for 10 years, and had the benefit of education there and being taught a great deal by veterans, it was the right thing to do, and it worked.
Stand by. All right, we're short on time, so I'm going to cut the music kind of close. And we have the joy, the pleasure, and the honor of having with us Colonel Douglas Macgregor. His book is Warrior's Rage, The Great Tank Battle of 73 Easting, in which he had a big part. And we have a couple callers. I wanted to get a quick question in. Your book is incredibly detailed about the battle. Are you a diarist? How do you get that kind of detail in a book?
Well, I did take notes at the time, but it took me several years to write the book because I had to go and interview lots of people. And I can tell you that one of the things that you discover when you have been in a battle like this is, despite what you thought, how much you didn't know.
Oh.
And so I learned a great deal from a lot of people who were in a lot of places, because remember, I couldn't be everywhere.
Right. You get a much different, you get a three-dimensional picture when you talk to other people. It's like investigating a crime. I'm a personal defense instructor, and two eyewitnesses to an incident will never give you the same report.
That's absolutely right.
Boy. All right, back to the phones, and David, you're live on America Armed and Free with Colonel Douglas Macgregor. The book is Warrior's Rage, The Great Tank Battle of 73 Easting. Your comment or question?
Good afternoon, Charles. And Colonel, first, thank you so much for your service. The information that you've brought out today is just mind-boggling for me. I like to read a lot about tank warfare, and so I have two questions. First one being, what are your thoughts about the German General Manstein as a commander? And the second one is, should Patton have delayed the production of the M26 Pershing tank as he did?
Well, let's answer the second one first. The answer is no. I don't know that we can blame Patton exclusively for that. There were a lot of people involved in that decision. I would encourage you to read General George Marshall's testimony, which is in the congressional record that he gave after the war, explaining why it took so long for those Pershing tanks to show up, which, of course, cost us a lot of lives and a lot of equipment.
Sure did.
The first question that you asked, I think, is a complex one. Von Manstein was a very competent general staff officer. Of that, we can be absolutely certain. He was a competent commander in the field. But this is someone, and a lot of people don't know this, who benefited enormously from Hitler. Hitler had a secret bank account, and he transferred millions of marks to the bank accounts of senior German generals, and effectively bought many of them. Von Manstein was one he bought. So von Manstein was bribed to do much of what he did. There's no excuse for it. It was wrong. He shouldn't have done it. And certainly after Stalingrad, he had an obligation, in my judgment, to remove Hitler. And he could have done it, but that's another issue.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
All right, and Steve, you're live on America Armed and Free with Colonel Douglas Macgregor of Warriors Rage, the Great Tank Battle of 73 Easting. Your comment or question?
Thank you, Charles.
You're welcome.
Colonel, I've been hearing recently that what's been making rounds in the military analyst field is that we were running short of fuel and other logistics, and that was supposed to be the reason why the war was cut short in Desert Storm. Now, I didn't see any evidence of that in the Marines. Did you note anything like that?
There was an enormous quantity of supplies, unending quantities of ammunition and fuel and so forth, including water. The problem in many cases was as follows. You had all of these frightened commanders, to be blunt, who insisted, for instance, during the offensive that all of the tanks be kept at idle in case the Iraqi launched some sort of counterattack. The M1A1 tank burns as much fuel sitting still as it does moving. It's an 8-hour tank. That's on a good day. In other words, you have 8 hours of fuel and it's over. So there was enormous consumption of fuel that was unnecessary. In my unit, whenever we were halted, which was frequently, unfortunately, I ordered all of the tanks to be shut down to ensure that we did not waste fuel. It takes about 3 or 4 minutes for the M1A1 tank to crank back up again and begin moving, and I was willing to do that. I really wasn't worried about the Iraqi counterattack or anything else since we controlled the airspace. We had plenty of warning from our scouts. We knew where we were. So the last thing I was concerned about was being surprised by the Iraqi. But unfortunately, there were a lot of people that thought that way. That did have an impact, particularly in the 1st Armor Division. They practically ran the 7th Corps out of fuel.
Okay.
But it was self-inflicted, I think is what I'm trying to tell you. It wasn't necessary.
Yeah, we didn't have quite any of those problems over on the Marine side of the deal. But it's good to hear a confirmation there. Thank you.
One thing, interesting thing you had in your book, referring to running yourself out of fuel, but is it possible for a sheep to stop an Abrams tank?
Well, we got a little bit of trouble for taking out some camels during target practice in Saudi Arabia. People were bored and they wanted to ensure that they were capable of hitting the enemy, and the camel was attractive and moved, and at great range people would shoot them, and that upset the Saudis. And so when we ran into herds of sheep, we did stop. They were a pretty mangy group of sheep, by the way, some of the nastiest sheep I've ever seen in my life. Large numbers of them died for the lack of water in the desert.
Yes, that would be, I guess, the definition of an assault sheep.
Well, that was always something that was very funny. When we first showed up, we found all of these dead sheep in the assembly area. Mm-hmm. And somebody said, "Don't touch them. We'll have them analyzed." And so the privates looked at the soldiers and said, "Well, hell, these damn things died because they don't have any water." And of course they were right, but they picked up these sheep and shipped them back. And then after the war was over, so like 2 or 3 months later, I get this notification from the Army Research Lab that after a careful investigation and assessment, the sheep were dehydrated.
Desiccated.
Your tax dollars at work.
Sometimes the truth is funnier than fiction could ever be written to be. When you look at things like that, with the Army saying things like that, and then you think of books like Catch-22, do they suddenly seem more realistic than fiction?
Well, I'm afraid so. I mean, there is truth in all of that. But again, there's reason for optimism in this sense. The sane people are the soldiers who do the fighting. They're also the people who are the least afraid. We had a visit from